Hi there, BookTube, and especially Jane Austen July participating BookTubers. I'm back with a little mini Jane Austen July segment about The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow, which was published in 2020 and is a kind of a retelling and extension on from Pride and Prejudice, taking the perspective of the middle Bennet sister. So we have Jane, Lizzy, the young ones, Kitty and Lydia, and in the middle, boring, plain, rather plodding and solemn and irritating Mary. And Hadlow does a lovely thing in trying to take the sort of neglected member of the family and reconfigure her as an interesting character in her own right. Sadly, though, I really didn't enjoy this book that much. Now, and so my kind of like, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about it, but I guess my question in this little mini video is, should I just give up on Jane Austen fan fiction? You know, Jane Austen retellings, Jane Austen inspired novels, and just stick to reading Jane Austen or Jane Austen contemporaries or books about Jane Austen? Because, you know, each year for Jane Austen July, I give it a go, you know, and I read one of these retellings, or I try really hard to pick ones that I you know, are really well reviewed and that people really enthuse about. And you know, I read Longbourn, and you know, I could see what she was trying to do. You know, that the author there is trying to sort of retell Pride and Prejudice from the bottom up, so from the perspective of the servants and giving them a voice and a life. And you know, yeah, I'm all for it, but actually it's just not Pride and Prejudice. And you know, that was the same problem with this book for me. You know, it's like, what a risky thing to do, to set yourself up against one of England's finest writers and one of her most popular books. You know, it's brave, isn't it? Perhaps I should admire the bravery. And to give Hadlow credit, she does try to capture something of Austen's language, Austen's way of writing, but she just can't pull it off. And there's bits where it's almost like she's almost plagiarizing Pride and Prejudice, or all other sort of bits of Austen. Yeah, it just disappoints me. The first half of the book, it's too long. That's the other thing, it's too long. First half of the book is a sort of retelling of Pride and Prejudice, seeing all the events from Mary's perspective. It's okay, but it kind of dragged on. And also it over-exaggerates other characters' behaviour in a way, like Jane. Jane uses exaggerated characters for humour and for dramatic effect, and you know, for all sorts of reasons. But there's always a subtlety to it and always a nuance. You know, Mrs. Bennet in Pride and Prejudice is a figure of fun, but she's also a poignant figure, and you can see her logic and her reasoning, and you can feel for her in the scorn that, you know, she has from her husband. How awful to have a husband that kind of looks down on you. Mrs. Bennet in The Other Bennet Sister is mean and nasty and unkind to Mary in a way that is beyond what I felt I ever saw in Pride and Prejudice. Yeah, Lizzy and Jane are kind of uncaring about her. I mean, oh yeah, in every way, it sort of just exaggerates things. The second half of the book is maybe better because she then creates her own story instead of, you know, mimicking, you know, a different perspective on the Austen book. So she picks up after, you know, Mr. Austen has just died, and they've had to leave Longbourn, and it follows Mary through from there. But actually, and one of the things I liked about it was it did sort of explore Mr. Collins' character more, and Charlotte Lucas's. Although it makes Charlotte Lucas out a bit kind of, I don't know, of a harsher character than I think she was. In Pride and Prejudice, that is. I know she isn't real. When you read Jane Austen, the characters become real to you. Well, so I speak about them that way. But anyway, so that's quite nice. And she tries to picture what the Bingleys' household would be like, when they're married. What Lizzy and Darcy's relationship would be like when they're married. Yeah, but then she has Mary, transform herself and really become a completely different character. Now, one thing I liked was that this is effectively done through the power of poetry, and specifically William Wordsworth. And as a Wordsworth fan, I approve of that in principle. But it didn't quite ring true, that she just sort of, through reading and through exposure to poetry and through novels and whatever, that she and the supportive presence of Mrs. Gardiner, her aunt, I suppose, that she just decides to remake herself in a different way. That was kind of okay, but slightly unconvincing. But then where it really lost it for me was the sort of, it moved into a kind of classic romance plot of Regency romance plot or 19th century romance plot of two people who love each other, but it misunderstand that or don't quite come together as this. So it's the Lizzy Mr. Darcy plot, it's the Jane Bingley plot, it's Anne Elliot and Captain Wentworth in Persuasion, it's it's what happens to Eleanor Dashwood, say. And when Jane Austen does that, she makes it subtle and clever and believable and frustrating and sometimes sad and sometimes magical and ultimately satisfying. And when Janice Hadlow did it, for me, it was just predictable. So, tell me, what do you think? Are there any retellings, fan fiction books out there that I should, carry on attempting? Or are most of them going to be even worse than Longbourn and if I can't like either Longbourn or the Other Bennet Sister, is there any point in trying any others? Tell me what you think.